When you had that one comment about the knights in white satin,
Yeah.
which I guess is sort of inevitable. I mean, I had always heard from people that they generally liked that scene, and especially the music in that scene, even if they had other problems with different parts of the film. So I was a bit surprised that someone would.
Well, I'm doing a lot of Q&As in France now because the film is going to be released, and 90% of people really enjoy the mix of the music, and you have 10% that are too surprised and they get out of the film. I accept. It's normal.
So, since we're on the subject of the sound, I was wondering if you could say how you were working with the sound for most of the project, not just the music, but also the score and also the ambient sound that's present throughout.
I'm trying more and more to write the sound very, very early, and to put as many sound indications in the script as I can. Of course, it's difficult because it's kind of abstract. But when I can find some sound ideas, I'm very happy while the writing. For example, the champagne stuff, all that kind of things. And it's a unique location, So it was very interesting for me to use the sound as what do you hear from when you're in this room, what do you hear, So I really try to avoid all the outside atmosphere. You don't hear the horses, in the street, or people talking, and because I tried, but I didn't like it.
So there were actually horses that were walking by outside.
In 1900?
Oh, right.
No. When you do your editing,
right?
But I didn't like because it was putting him back into some kind of folklore, which I really tried to avoid. So most of the atmosphere was work on voices, and yes, of voices, and the score, not the soul music songs, but the score which I did is very kind of electronic, minimal stuff, and for me it gave a central atmosphere to the general sound.
So when you said that you write the score for the actual soundtrack and the soul music, had you decided on what specific songs you were going to use before you even shot?
Very, very precise. It's on the script. It's on the first draft. It says when it starts. It says when it stops. Because for me, it's a way of using the music in a way that tells something and that does not illustrate. If you when you write your script, if you know when here there is this music, you know that you do not have to say something, to put some more words. The music is here to say that. So, for me, it's better use of the music. The most early you think the music, the best way you use it, I think.
I mean, would you say that a large part of the script, or at least the scenes that were set to music, were ideas that came to you while you were just listening to the
song? Yeah, for example, the Night in White Satin, very early I had this image of 10 girls dancing and crying, listening to that song. So I read the scene, then I asked myself, how am I going to go there? It's I do it the reverse way, but...
So I know that during the Q&A yesterday you had mentioned that you have certain points, like the dream that's described in the beginning, and then a visualization of that dream later on, and that a lot of your task with the making of the film is filling in, getting from that one point to this point. How many specific points would you say that there are that you're starting with and that you're then working in the between?
I think the first, when I start a script, okay, I say to myself, I'm going to do a film in a brothel 1900, okay. And I need to write 5 or 6, I call them the fundamental scenes. And it's the scenes that I really, really want to shoot. it's not important for the story, it's important for my desire of cinema. When I have these 5 or 6 scenes, and I'm pretty sure that will keep me alive with the film, I write what's in between. And in this film, you have, for example, the scene of the girls dancing on 19 White Satin. You have the dream, the sperm tears. You have, for example, I don't know why, but 12 girls eating meat and potato and talking. You have the beginning credits with the black and white pictures. You have a few things that, every time it's tough and you lose trust in your picture, you go back to that, and it's a relationship between you and the movie you want to make. So yes, I would say like maybe 6 or 7 scenes, and then I really write them, and after that all the work from draft to draft is to get from one to another.
Right.
And very quickly I wrote like the epilogue in the street today.
Okay.
Something that was very important to me. To show a girl that was in a brothel in 1900 and to show the same girl today on the street.
And was that your original ending, or did you have other possibilities that you were considering?
When I'm talking about these 5 or 6 scenes, they do not move. They have their place in the film, and it's very, very strong for me.
I just remember reading that you sometimes have a bit of a struggle in deciding how to end some of your films.
No, it's because I do like always 6 endings. The film never ends. Because I could end in this picture. There are also a lot of beginnings. But I always say to my editor, I think next film I would just do like beginnings and endings, but no film, And I think I could make 90 minutes like that.
Right.
Because it could stop 10 times in this film.
So it's not that you sort of went through 6 different ideas
of
how you could end
it's
it,
just
and
one
then you
after
decided
the
on
other.
one. It's just, I see. Okay. So I was looking up your name a while back, probably over a year ago, and one of the main entries that came up was this entry about that James Quant, who is one of the chief programmers at the Bell Lightbox, but also writes for Artforum. He wrote an article about this new movement of new French extremity, of which he includes you, Breillat, Dumont, Noé, and he sort of defined it as it is a movement that is determined to break every taboo, to wade in rivers of viscera and spumes of sperm. I wonder how you might see yourself in that movement, or if you think that that's just a completely arbitrary grouping.
No, I accept that someone writes that. I don't feel this way, because my purpose is not to be aggressive or provocative, or it's just to put some to show things the way I in the most beautiful way for me in terms of cinema. I'm not trying. I know a few. I know Gaspard a little, or Bruno. I know they want to shock sometimes. It's never my what I try to do. For me, for example, when a film comes out, I'm very surprised. I could have shocked some people. For me, it's just the most beautiful way. Beautiful in terms of the best way. Emotionally talking, to show things. So I'm not trying to be extremist.
Right.
But after that, if someone writes an article, and I've read this quite a few times, I accept it from the outside, but it's not something I'm searching.
I mean, I think even specifically with his definition of the new French extremity, it's always sort of been more towards your views of sexuality and gender, but I think maybe if someone were to attribute that to also include House of Tolerance, then it would almost be more of the more horrific imagery that takes place of the violence.
Yeah, because for example in this film there's no sex at all. You don't see it could have been a place to try to be extremist in sexual scenes, because it's a place for that, and I was not very interested in that. But the horror, also I think most of the films I was watching when I was a teenager were horror films, so I guess
Like which ones?
I had like my first VHS now in around 79, so I guess it's Suspiria from Dario Argento, The Brood from David Cronenberg, the Carpenter's movie, Top Hooper, all this generation, which I watched a lot.
And I noticed that I definitely, especially in Teresia and when they hum in House of Tolerance, sometimes I feel like a motherless child. But I always sort of think of Pasolini when I watch your work. Has he been a key figure for you? Or
yes.
Yeah.
But not the Pasolini filmmaker. Not only, it's just the man, the figure of the man, his brain, the mix of this huge intelligence and this huge poetry at the same time. I've never seen in the same person the mix so strong. But it was a big something very important for me, yes, in my 20s.
And also tying in Teresia with perhaps this film, I was wondering if you think of mythology as a very key influence for a lot
mythology
of your work.
is for me like a huge territory to tell stories, and the Greeks, they really understood that you could use theater and mythology to say things you cannot say in life, and it's a way to have a society that kind of has an equilibrium. It's an idea we totally lost. Now we do not dare to say in film stuff, we do them in life, and we have a sick world. So, and the mythology is huge territory for fiction, but it's like in movies, the American mythology, it exists in a way, But I tried with Teresia to say that Greek mythology is as alive, as fascinating, as violent as the American mythology. Is just searching somewhere else.
I mean, in a way, I almost thought that the way the House of Tolerance ended, where it ended up in the present with one of the same characters from 100 years before, still at the same age, it almost kind of mythologized the entire beginning of. I mean, not really
because
the
it's
beginning
something
of the movie,
about destiny.
The entire movie.
Le destin. Fate. No, about fate.
Okay.
And fate is very Greek stuff.
Also, I was wondering about your use of animals, or in your work, because I know that you have the panther in this one, and then you've also had animal masks on War, and I wonder if there might be a certain significance for animals.
I know. In every picture, I think there are animals. It's not nothing significant. Well, in On War maybe there are more signification because it's disappearing behind. Of course, the mask in the history of the world is very important, and also an animal mask is going back to something very animal. Right. But the panther is. I like the idea just of having in a room something that is so beautiful, so so soft, and at the same time so dangerous. I like this.
It's also an interesting kind of black hole that kind of emerged on the screen, because at least for the first few times that you see it, you just sort of see a shape rather than an animal. It had a really nice look to it. And speaking of the visual style, I know that you did a lot of research for your formulation of how it looks, and especially, I mean, this is the only film I've seen by you on in the cinema. Everything else I've had to see on DVD.
Yeah.
But it definitely seemed to be extremely visually accomplished in ways that the others weren't quite as much. And would you attribute that to the research, or
I
would
think
you even
it's
disagree with that?
when you create a place, from A to Z. Of course, nothing comes from reality, real world. If you don't have shot in the streets with cars going, so everything is under control. That's something I really enjoyed in film d'époque, film in costume. How do you say that? A film that happens in another time.
Oh, a period piece?
Period piece. It's something I really enjoy doing a period piece, is that you have to control everything. So it gives, of course, a sensation of much more achieved, because, yes, we made everything.
Right. I guess we kind of romanticized how that
exactly, and you allow yourself a lot of things, There is a lot of research, and from this research, after that, I think you can do what you want. You can lie if you know what the truth is.
So would you say, what would you say were some of the biggest or most important resources in your research? Perhaps
I think everything, more than painting, was writing, and everything that told me about the rituals. What time they wake up, how they wash, how they clean out their teeth, what do they eat, all these kind of things, the details, all the details. That was for me the most important stuff.
And where would you find information about
a few
so
books?
specific?
A few books done by journalists, police archives, fascinating police archives. Also diaries. And books from writers, not only from journalists, from writers that spent nights and evenings in these places and that wrote stories. Even from Proust, there is a book in which there are 15 pages in a brothel, and as Proust writes, it's always it describes a lot, so you pick up stuff.
Something autobiographical that you see that runs through a lot of your films? I remember thinking when I saw The Pornographer that there was a very strong sense that what I was saying was autobiographical.
Yeah.
And also with On War, I wonder if you find House of Tolerance to also be autobiographical to some extent.
Good question. I think so. First of all, it's the name of the house I grew up in, Apollonide.
Oh, so that's where the title comes from. Okay.
If there is something autobiographical, I would say it's about. It's difficult to answer because it's not in the actual stories. It's in the in the details. For example, I think the house I grew up in was a house with. It was not a brothel, but something very open with writers, painters, and something very free, very full of quite intelligent and funny people at the same time. And it may be something I'm running after, to recreate. And I feel I cannot because time have changed. And the film says this in a way. It's the end of the house, it's the end of a period, it's the end of the 19th century, the 20th century is going up to start. It's going to be very different from what we expected. Time have changed.
Mm-hmm. Would there be a character that you perhaps identify with or sympathize with more than others?
I guess the one that ends up on the street, I feel quite close from her.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the housekeeper. I could see my mother in that.
So I personally found this to be one of the certainly one of the strongest films that was playing in Cannes this year, but somehow its reception wasn't quite so strong. I was wondering.
It was very strong in the theater.
If it makes you a bit
very strong
pessimistic.
in the theater, very strong in the French press. I know the foreign press was much more divided. I was very happy, for example, it's my film that was the most sold in different countries.
Oh yeah.
It's the first time I have a film that's going to be released in America, for example. So it's a mix between very, very good news and reception in the film, and a part of it which was it's very difficult to realize when you're inside Cannes and you have your pictures.
Right.
After the juries, it's something else again. It's another group.
But is it something that affects you quite a bit when you hear that a specific national press is very much
better than the
or just not getting it? Like, I think the American press in particular were
we had
strangely very down on it. And
we had very good reviews in Variety, Hollywood Reporter, and New York Times, and the rest was terrible. I was a little sad about that, because for me it's important that films travel. Do not stay into the Franco-French stuff. It's very important for me to give air. So of course at the same time I was very happy that the film was sold much more than the others, and sad that the press didn't follow, but if the distributors invite me when they release films in every country, I will go and try to discuss with the journalists, of course.
So last, I just want to ask you if you have anything that's sort of moving around in your head for a next project, or if you actually have something in production already for...
Not in production. I have started to write a few stuff. It's a horror movie with kids, and a film about a coach of a soccer team, and a film about French terrorists. I've got a few things running on my table. I'm waiting a little to see the real reaction of this film. That's to say, the audience.
Right, the general public.
I'm expecting a little of that.
Well, I mean, I think based on the screening I was at yesterday, it definitely is. It seems to be working better with general audiences than
journalists.
Some of the journalists.
Maybe because they let themselves more go during the screening. Maybe journalists sometimes, even during the screening, they want to understand because it's their job. I don't know.
All right.